There's one person who has not weighed in on this Boogie 2988 situation so far, and the reason they haven't is because it's not in their wheelhouse. And that person is the one person who needs to weigh on the Boogie 2988 situation with the alleged allegations that Boogie faked cancer. And that person is Coach Greg. Greg Doucette needs to weigh in on the Boogie 2988 situation in regards to polycythemia versus polycythemia vera, secondary polycythemia, because the hormone marker that Boogie has been talking about is EPO. EPO is a hormone that increases your production of red blood cells called erythropoietin. It's secreted by the kidneys and liver, and it's used to increase your red blood cells. Now, a small amount of it is produced at all times by the liver and kidneys due to the fact that red blood cells have a 90-day lifespan, so you need to have a small amount of it to deal with red blood cell turnover. It is also the hormone that Lance Armstrong got caught with. A lot of cyclists and endurance athletes end up using this because it increases your hematocrit and your hemoglobin, which is what carries oxygen to your tissues, and oxygenated tissues perform better. And when there's oxygenated tissues, you have better endurance. Of course, the side effects of it can include things such as, a heart attack, stroke, all of that thing. But it is something that a lot of athletes will use when they're on cycle. And Greg Doucette talks about what happens when guys go on, men and women go on cycle. And what needs to happen is he needs to go on and talk about how testosterone can increase this hormone. Now, you can't actually take this hormone endogenously. It's an illegal performance-enhancing drug, but it is a thing that people have done. But also, when people are on androgenic and anabolic cycles, their EPO goes up. And it also is a risk of testosterone replacement therapy. And that risk with TRT goes up with taking testosterone replacement therapy, being obese or overweight, such as Boogie is, having obstructive sleep apnea, which Boogie did say that he has obstructive sleep apnea in the documentary, and he also said he has asthma. Asthma, we all know, is a breathing problem. The fact that Boogie has asthma, along with sleep apnea, along with the inability to produce his own testosterone, and at least according to him, he has testicular hypogonadism. Uh, and taking an exogenous testosterone makes me believe that Boogie 2988 actually is either faking the cancer for sympathy or confused. And the one thing I want to know is what Coach Greg has to think, because Coach Greg often has talked about, so have other people who talk about. I got really interested in anabolic steroids recently, not because I want to take them, but just because I was watching bodybuilding and I was like, this is way more gay than I thought it would be. but but that's a whole thing. But I've gotten really interested in like seeing what the guys there do. Um, and Coach Greg's a guy who I watch, and he always talks about things. But one thing that pretty much everybody who talks about what to do when guys are on a cycle is that they have to get their blood, first of all, drawn to test their blood markers, because you got to test your cholesterol, your hormones, your E2, your testosterone, your DHT, all of that. Got to test all that. But they also suggest therapeutic phlebotomy, which honestly, if you're going to suggest therapeutic phlebotomy, that's great. Suggest people go to the Red Cross, because we cannot keep up with the blood demand, which is interesting. Um, but that's a thing. But every single time somebody talks about being on cycle, they talk about how you have to have your blood drawn because it affects it. And when you take the blood out, that taking blood out obviously takes cells out. It takes the older cells out. It makes the blood less thick. Obviously, you'll build up more blood cells as you go. But if you do that every month, it's a whole thing. Have you ever had a blood test where it was a Like when I had my first visit with my new doctor 2 years ago, they had to do a full metabolic panel, a lipid panel, an A1C test, a hormone test, and a blood STD test. It was like 9 vials, 9 or 10 vials of blood. And when you get that taken out, you feel like crap after. But then like you might be maybe breathing heavier when you're trying to walk and everything. That's EPO. EPO. If they had tested my EPO at that point, I would have had high EPO. Like if they had taken more blood, another vial like an hour later, because they took so many red blood cells. I have I probably have a high EPO right now too because I have low iron anemia, which means that I don't have highly oxygenated blood, so it's trying to increase the blood cells. But we are going to test that next week, just to see if the anemia is fixed. Because if it is, I've been breathing a lot better. I've been having much better endurance, which is probably a reconditioning plus the iron. But if Coach Greg could come on and just talk about EPO and what EPO does and the risks of it and how secondary polycythemia is a huge risk of going on any cycle, including just TRT, it would be so interesting to see how Boogie reacted to that. But I don't think Coach Greg would ever come on and talk about Boogie because Boogie is, obese. He's probably not going to talk about me because I'm obese too. But it would be interesting to see. So yeah, there's one person who needs to talk about the Boogie situation, but who won't.